Gene Simmons and Shannon Tweed met at the Playboy Mansion in 1983. He waited 28 years to marry her. But their wedding in 2011 wasn't about love. It was about hiding a scandal that nearly tore his family apart. Recently found video from their reality program shows conversations that were never supposed to be seen by the public. His son was caught stealing other people's work. Legal papers from 2025 talk about things that happened with female workers. The man who said he had sex with 4,800 women is now facing more than just his bad reputation. There was a time when Gene Simmons wasn't Gene Simmons. Cam Witz was born on August 25, 1949, in Haifa, Israel. Flora Klein, his mother, had just come back from hell. She was born in Hungary in 1925 and barely made it out of the Nazi concentration camps. Perrin once, Jokiel Witz's father, also fled Hungary and married Flora in 1946. They moved to Israel in 1947, shortly before the state was founded, and British troops were still in the way. Their past was full of anguish, and that pain quietly reverberated through everything Haim would become. Things became worse by the time he was 6 in 1955. The main reason his parents' marriage ended was because they didn't have enough money. His dad stayed in Israel. In Tyrat Carmel, his mother reared him by herself. She worked in factories almost every day, sewing buttons just to feed them. They simply got bread and milk for dinner at times. Haim was already attempting to help at the age of 7. Gathered fruit from the wild with a companion and sold it on the side of the road. He knew what it meant to fight. He used an army blanket to make his first winter clothing. He had no other choice, even though it was freezing. His mom worked late into the night, and he often wept himself to sleep in a house that was deserted. It didn't get any easier at school. Other kids picked on him because he was different. Some of the animosity that his mother had to deal with after the war followed him into the classroom. But something else also found him. He used comic novels, like Spider-Man and Superman, to get away from it all. He tried nevertheless, even though he couldn't read English yet. He could already speak Hebrew, Hungarian, and Turkish by the time he was 7. And now he was also learning English in secret, all because he wanted to comprehend the heroes in those comics. In a world that was still recuperating from war, when food was scarce and hope seemed hard to find, those stories gave him something to cling on to. His mother didn't say much about what she'd been through, but the pain was always there. Haim had a better idea of what was going on by 1957. The Nazis made her work when she was just 14 years old. She had to harvest potatoes in fields as soldiers with weapons watched. She wore garments with crosses on them. Going from camp to camp, seeing her world fade away one relative at a time. She didn't have to use words to convey it. The way she didn't talk, how she was too protective, and how she sometimes cried for no reason. Haim got it. It left something in him as well. A need to never feel weak. To never let anyone see him fall apart. In 1957, the same year, Flora made a choice that would change everything. She didn't have much, but she and her 8-year-old son Haim left Israel. They got to Queens, New York, with no money, no English, and no family waiting for them. His dad stayed behind, got married again, and began a new life. Haim never saw him again. He changed his name to Eugene Klein and started afresh. He was amazed by flush toilets and TV meals, but it wasn't easy for him to get used to them. Flora worked long hours in factories in Brooklyn, sometimes up to 15 hours a day. Gene had to learn the norms of a strange new world and take care of himself with babysitters. He went to a Jewish school for a while, but he didn't fit there. After that, he went to a public school. In 1967, he graduated from Newtown High. At first, the other kids made fun of the way he spoke. He felt like a stranger everywhere he went because of his accent. But he didn't let it get the best of him. Sold cacti from door to door. He plucked fruit again, exactly like he did in Israel. Every criticism and every no made him work harder. He learned English faster by watching more TV and reading more comics. That's when his love of pop culture really took off. In 1959, when he was just 9 years old, he changed his name again, this time to Gene Klein. He chose Gene because he liked cowboy stars like Gene Autry. He was all in on being American now, even if he still lived in a little apartment with his mother and cousins. He loved TV, especially The Ed Sullivan Show. When the Beatles came on February 9, 1964, something inside him lit up. He wanted that kind of life. He wanted the fame and the stage. He wanted to feel like someone, but deep inside he still felt like the boy with he even claimed to be British sometimes, adopting the Beatles' accents to fit in. The girls liked it. He felt awkward and unsure, going through the hard transitions that come with being a teenager. But his charm was slowly getting stronger. Gene worked any job he could find in the 1960s. He worked in butcher shops, cutting up meat. He worked behind the counter at delis. He made only $1,025 an hour, but he saved all of it. He learned to count every penny since he was poor. He didn't drink alcohol, even at gatherings. He saw how older men got drunk and messy. He stayed smart. That's how he got chicks. He said it himself. He stayed clear-headed as everyone else lost theirs. He started learning how to play the guitar and practiced all the time. He couldn't stop after he saw the Beatles on TV. He started making plans for his future while still in school by forming small bands. He attended to Sullivan County Community College in 1968. He studied education, acquired an associate degree by 1970, and even taught 6th grade in Spanish Harlem for $75 a week. But he didn't want to be in the classroom. He teamed up with Paul Stanley to start a band called Rainbow, which changed its name to Wicked Lester in 1970. They worked different jobs throughout the day and played in clubs at night. Gene even wrote for a fashion magazine. He also worked as a translator, employing the Hungarian, Turkish, and Spanish he learned as a child from babysitters and neighbors. But music was where his heart was. He tried out numerous sounds and even made some solo tracks with his name on them. He was sending money back to his mother the whole time, still feeling the burden of her survival and everything she lost in 1945. Then there was the part of his story that even his supporters were stunned by. Gene Simmons says that in 1963, when he was almost 14, he lost his virginity. He was merely a child who delivered newspapers. He knocked on a customer's door one cold night, just before Christmas. She cried and answered, wearing only a flimsy nightgown. She was married. What happened next? He later wrote a lot about it in his book. It wasn't merely the start of his sexual life. Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley worked together in 1970. They started a band called Wicked Lester with Steve Coronel, Brooke Ostrander, and Tony Zarella. The music was an odd combination of rock and folk. Sprang from the volatile music scene in New York City. They had finished recording a whole album at Electric Lady Studios, which Jimi Hendrix had created, by October 15, 1972. Epic Records spent a lot of money to make it happen, but their A&R head, Don Ellis, detested it. He put it away for good since he thought the sound was too odd and muddy for radio. Gene was very upset by the rejection. He had put a lot of work into the project, but now it was dead before it ever started. Gene and Paul were so upset that they fired Steve Coronel, hired Ron Lyjak for a short time, and eventually shut down Wicked Lester completely. But that wasn't the end. Gene and Paul paid $138,000 in 1977 to buy back the old Wicked Lester tapes after Kiss became popular. They did this to make sure they never got out. They were afraid that the old sound would spoil the tough image they were trying to create. Later, though, bootlegs surfaced online that had songs like She and Love Her All I Can, which Kiss would later re-record without giving credit to the original band. That band that didn't make it made something bigger. By January 1973, Paul and were done with making deals. Peter Criss, a well-known drummer from bands including Lips and Chelsea, placed an ad in Rolling Stone. He joined right away. Then they saw an ad in the Village Voice for Ace Frehley. They all worked together to make something very new. This band wasn't going to be like any other rock band. There would be makeup, fire, and fantasy in the crazy, over-the-top spectacle. They started Kiss after being inspired by Alice Cooper's shock rock and the glam flair of New York Dolls. The Coventry, a small club in Queens that used to be called the Popcorn Club, hosted their debut event on January 30, 1973. There were only 3 people there, and some of them were the band's girlfriends. But that night, Jean breathed fire for the first time on stage. It was a show that everyone remembered. They created a fan base without a single hit song or any exposure on MTV. Not through the radio, but through fan magazines and live shows. In 1974, they were the main act at Anaheim Stadium. Jean subsequently remarked that their makeup was so weird and memorable that people couldn't forget it. It was strange, harsh, and spreading. In 1973, made the Demon. He painted bat wings around his eyes and started breathing fire and spewing blood on stage. He got the idea from horror movies like Black Sabbath and comic book heroes like Black Bolt. A pro had taught him the tricks. When the band first started playing with makeup, they didn't have a plan. Jean chose horror. Peter put cat whiskers on his face. Ace turned himself as an extraterrestrial from space. In front of mirrors, they painted frantically, striving to make something that had never been seen before. There were only a few people during their early shows. At the Coventry, there were between 10 and 15 people, and occasionally even fewer. But those few folks kept talking. Kids were spreading the message even before the internet. Jean remarked it felt weird and sticky. But it was doing its job. That makeup, fire, and blood changed anger into interest. They didn't need a smash song on the radio. They just had to be memorable. Bill Aucoin saw Kiss play at the Hotel Diplomat in August 1973. He had so much faith in them that he said he would get them a record deal in 2 weeks. And he did. They had signed with Casablanca Records, a completely new label run by Neil Bogart, by November 1st. Peter Criss was so happy when he got the news that he slipped off his platform heels. With the help of producer Eddie Kramer, the band rapidly made their first album. On February 18, 1974, it came out. Were slow at initially, with barely 75,000 copies sold. But the band kept going. That year, they played more than 300 performances. Kiss's relentless touring protected Casablanca Records from going out of business. At first, Neil Bogart didn't believe in their makeup trick, but as he observed the crowds becoming bigger, he knew it was working. In 1975, they were filling stadiums even though they didn't have a single big radio hit. Jean said it was a risk that made them famous. Jean picked up a weird habit during those early years. He started shooting Polaroid pictures of his sexual escapades. As verification, each woman had to show a hotel key. He said he had taken about 5,000 of these pictures over the years and bragged in interviews that he had slept with more than 4,600 women. He also let friends and guests see the pictures. Slick from Jefferson Airplane said it was gross. Put them all in a box and locked it. After their 2011 wedding, his wife Shannon Tweed found them and burnt them live on their reality program. This ended that part of his life. Jean never did drugs, but his addiction to sex formed a big part of his wild on-stage personality. He converted disorder into a performance and then into power, from local clubs to huge stadiums. On September 10, 1975, everything changed. They put out the live album Alive at that time. It was loud, raw, and full of the craziness of their shows. Every track had the sound of flames, cries, and blood. That year, songs were recorded in areas like Cleveland, Detroit, Davenport, and Wildwood. The album achieved quadruple platinum on May 16, June 21, July 20, and July 23, selling more than 4 million copies. It got to number 9 on the Billboard charts and stayed there for 110 weeks. That record kept Casablanca from going out of business. There was even a lawsuit against Neil Bogart at the time, and Kiss's success saved the company from going under. The name of the album, Alive, was a reference to Slade's live album from 1972, which had given them the idea. It showed that the makeup, the flames, and the craziness all worked. They weren't just a weird band anymore. They were the next big thing in rock. They went further in 1976. Bob Ezrin was in charge of Destroyer when it came out on March 15. He added strings, a children's choir, reversed percussion sounds and sound effects, yelled out loud, and hit number 31 on the Billboard Hot 100. Ezrin didn't make it easy for Gene's song, God of Thunder, which was full of screaming and gloom. He threw away almost all of the 15 demo tracks the band handed him in August 1975. He changed the words of their song, changed the music around, and even played the bass on Detroit Rock City. Some songs took ideas from classical music. For example, Beethoven's Sonata Pathétique was used as a sample in Great Expectations. Rehearsals started in August 1975 when the Alive tour was on a break. Recording sessions at Electric Lady Studios went on through September and January. Every time Gene succeeded, his ego rose. While Ezrin worked on the sound, Gene made sure that his own personality stayed in the spotlight. The tours turned into more than just concerts by the end of the 1970s. They were real shows. The Dynasty Tour went from June 15 to December 16, 1979. Gene flew around the stage, and Ace Frehley shot rockets from his guitar at props that were spouting smoke. John Elder Robeson, their technician, made these amazing effects. They did 92 performances all throughout North America, but things were starting to fall apart. Some places were too empty, like the cancelled Pontiac Silver Dome events or the smaller Los Angeles shows. Peter Criss was having a hard time. He started using more drugs. He started ruining shows by stopping drumming in the middle of a performance just to be mean. Gene said it was self-destructive. The last gig in Toledo on December 16, 1979, made it plain that the original band was breaking up. The fans noticed the change, and disco had made its way into their music. Instead of dedicated rock fans, families started going to shows. Gene kept on flying. The band was coming down quickly. Things got weirder in 1978. On October 28, NBC showed a strange TV movie called Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park. The same people that made Scooby-Doo made it, Hanna-Barbera. Kiss depicted themselves as superheroes fighting a wicked inventor in a theme park. Made up lines about taking over the globe, which were similar to his real-life desire to make Kiss a global brand. The acting was bad. People who liked it loathed it. The other members of the band attempted to act like it never occurred, but they loved the attention. People on set weren't allowed to talk about the movie after it was over since it was so bad. It became a cult favorite, especially in Europe, where it was given the new moniker Attack of the Phantoms. The endeavor showed that Gene's ego wasn't simply large, it was also impossible to stop. On September 18 of that year, all four members put out their own CDs. Gene's record sold more copies than some of Kiss's real group albums. It had weird covers like When You Wish Upon a Star with Cher and Bob Seger as guests. His songs were about radiation and strange dreams. On May 23, 1979, Kiss released Dynasty, and the song I Was Made for Loving You reached number 11 on the Billboard charts. It sold more than 1 million copies and earned platinum in 5 different countries. But the disco sound ruined their reputation. Rock fans left, and ticket sales fell through the floor. Places got smaller. The magic was going away. Before he quit for good, Peter Criss only played drums on one song. The Fishers had turned into Splits. Kiss did the unthinkable on September 18, 1983. They peeled off their makeup on MTV Live. They showed their real faces after 10 years of keeping them a secret. They also put out Lick It Up, which sold over 1 million copies and went platinum. The sound was more forceful, raw, and heavy. The risk paid off. Sales went up and fans came back. Gene thought of it as a new beginning. By that time, Kiss had more than 100 licensed products, including action figures and lunchboxes, and made millions in sales. The masks were gone, but business was good. Gene took a break from music in 1984 and went to Hollywood. In the sci-fi movie Runaway, he plays the bad guy Luther. Michael Crichton directed him. He was a crazy scientist who employed killer robots to slaughter people. Gene acted out his lines with a lot of drama, and he died at the hands of the demons he made. Peter Criss was sacked from the band in 1980 because his drug use had gotten out of hand. Gene said it was a necessary amputation. Eric Carr took over as the new drummer, who was known as the Fox. They lost something awful, but it helped them start over. In 1989, Kiss put out Hot in the Shade, which contained the ballad Forever on it. It reached number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100. It sold more than 500,000 copies and was their biggest hit during the no-makeup years, although the tone was mellow and more romantic than rebellious. Fans were confused, but the sales showed that they were right. Gene was still chasing ladies behind the scenes. His affairs got in the way of the band's work. He didn't show up for sessions. He chose Hollywood over practice. Eric Carr sang lead on Little Caesar for the first time, but it was his last album before he died. In the year 1991, Gene's diversions almost ruined everything. Gene told the whole truth in his 2001 autobiography, Kiss in Makeup. He had sex with more than 4,800 women when he was in the band. One of the craziest stories occurred from the late 1970s. He went out with Cher from 1979 to 1980, but then he fell in love with her best friend, Diana Ross. It all started with a simple trip to the store to buy Christmas gifts, but it quickly escalated into a love triangle. They never got over what they did to Cher. People magazine blew up the incident, and it became one of rock history's most famous betrayals. Gene kept friends with both ladies, but the harm was done for good. Then came the biggest surprise of all. The original members of Kiss got back together in 1996. The makeup came back. Everywhere the shows were sold out. They played 92 gigs in 75 cities and sold 1.2 million tickets. The tour brought in $143 million. But things were tight behind the scenes. Frehley and Chris got a set charge of $80,000 for each show, while Gene and Paul got $110,000 plus profits. There were lawsuits that followed. Wounds that had healed opened up again. The success was real. But the issues were there too. They were breaking records, but they were also breaking up again. Gene Simmons starred in a reality show called Gene Simmons Family Jewels from 2006 to 2012. Cameras followed him about. It gave supporters a front-row ticket to his life at home with his longtime spouse, Shannon Tweed, and their 2 kids, Nick and Sophie. After Dog the Bounty Hunter, the show was A&E's second largest hit, running for 7 seasons. The series showed a softer, more family-oriented Simmons, although it didn't talk about most of his crazy background. In 2008, a sex tape of him with another lady came out, and he sued the person who made it, saying it was an invasion of privacy. But the biggest surprise happened in 2011, when Gene finally married Shannon after 28 years of avoiding it. The wedding was in the news. Some people who watched the show didn't like how it staged ridiculous events, including a bogus offer to buy an Australian football team. But it nevertheless made a man who was known solely for cosmetics and chaos seem more like a person. Gene's corporate empire was getting bigger. By the 2000s, he had put the Kiss emblem on more than 5,000 things. You might find it on everything from condoms to pinball machines to coffins. The brand was everywhere. Sales went above $1 billion. But in 2017, he went too far. Gene wanted to copyright the well-known devil horns hand sign, saying he came up with it in 1974. His filing said it was like the American Sign Language sign for I love you, with the index and pinky fingers up and the thumb out. There was an immediate backlash. Fans of metal were quite angry. People who didn't like him reminded him that John Lennon and Ronnie James Dio had been using the gesture long before Kiss. Gene gave up on the plan just a few days later, but the prank showed how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted. He had problems in other areas as well. Victoria Jackson, an ESPN makeup artist, sued Gene in 2010, saying he acted improperly during a 2009 SportsCenter appearance while he was fully dressed. She stated he hugged her and humped her. Gene said that wasn't true because his metal codpiece made it impossible. He even filed a counterclaim to prove his innocence. In the end, the matter was settled. But that wasn't the only time he got into trouble with the law. In 2016, a dishwasher at his eatery Rock and Brews said he touched her inappropriately. In 2017, another woman said the same thing. By 2018, both cases had been quietly settled. He repeatedly said that these lawsuits were without merit, but they kept coming and suggested a worrying pattern. His wealth kept growing, though. Gene Simmons was worth over $400 million by 2015. That didn't only come from songs. It originated from a lot of Kiss stuff. They have sold more than 100 million albums and are always on tour. In 2012, he and Paul Stanley started a restaurant chain called Rock and Brews, which grew to have more than one location. He also took part in strange projects, such as The Vault, which was a $2,000 collection of old recordings that came out in 2017. He became the chief evangelist officer for a cannabis startup called Invictus MD in 2018. The Kiss Arena football team collapsed after a few years in 2013. By 2025, his solo tour alone was making six figures every concert without even needing the whole Kiss setup. He and Shannon Tweed started dating in 1983 at the Playboy Mansion. Shannon, who was voted Playmate of the Year in 1982, knew Gene had a bad reputation when she entered his world. He said he had around 5,000 lovers by 2002, but they still made a life together. Nick, their son, was born in 1989. And their daughter Sophie was born in 1992. Gene would joke that marriage was a trap, using Groucho Marx as an example, but his actions finally went too far for Shannon. She left the Joy Behar show in 2011, calling him a pig. Later that year, she found his collection of pornographic Polaroids and burnt them on the air. Fans were stunned at that moment, but things changed. Gene asked her to marry him in Belize on July 26, 2011. They got married on October 1st. Nick was one of the groomsmen. And Sophie was the maid of honor. Was emotional and came out of nowhere, especially after 28 years of saying no. Their reality show didn't disguise the stress. In season 6, things changed when Shannon left for a short time after seeing a picture of Gene with two models at a Santa Monica event in 2009. The show followed them to therapy, where she revealed she never agreed to be in an open relationship and was blindsided. Gene finally talked about it and said that his past had made him quite afraid of making a commitment. Asked her to marry him, which surprised everyone. The show included 167 episodes and revealed more than simply their love. It highlighted how hard it is to be famous and how much grief it causes. Gene's tough man reputation fell apart in 2018. Flora Klein, his mother, died on December 5 at the age of 93. She survived the Holocaust and the horrors of Nazi camps. She lost her mother in a gas chamber. She moved to Israel and later to New York in 1950, where she raised Gene by herself. He always said that she had a big impact on his values. He was shaken by her passing. He named her his moral compass on Instagram and told people to love their mothers. His wife Shannon said she was the best grandma, and Paul Stanley said she loved fiercely. I saw Gene without the mask once. His kids weren't safe from the spotlight either. In 2010, Nick, his son, was in controversy for his comic book incarnate because it was said to have copied the Japanese manga Bleach. Fans revealed exact panel comparisons and wanted answers. Nick apologized and said it was meant as a tribute, but the publisher took the comic down. But the backlash didn't stop. Some people claimed the painting was bad and that the copying was too blatant. Defended his son, but the episode hurt Nick's reputation as a creator and followed him onto their reality program. In 2024, Gene's tendency of stating precisely what he thought got him into additional difficulty. He said things about female dancers on Dancing with the Stars on October 8 that a lot of people thought were weird. He kept raving about how pretty they looked instead of what they were doing. A comment about Chandler Kinney's glasses getting foggy went viral for all the wrong reasons. People on social media called him the gross uncle and asked ABC to say sorry. Gene didn't give up. He stated he stood by everything he said in an interview on October 10. The fan package arrived next, in April 2025. For $12,495, not counting the ticket, fans could enjoy the ultimate Gene Simmons experience, where they'd function as his roadie for a day. They would help with the sound check, eat backstage, and even be introduced on stage. You also get a signed bass guitar. Critics ripped it apart, saying it was shameless and tone-deaf, especially when times were tight. But the package was all gone. A veteran soldier who was a fan paid for the experience and said it was worth every penny. Still, the prank brought up old arguments about how greedy celebrities are, especially since jeans are so rich. The argument didn't end there. On August 13, 2025, President Trump said that Kiss would get the Kennedy Center honors. People who liked the show were perplexed. Gene had called Trump horrible for inciting hate in interviews just 3 years before. He even said that Trump's surge was like cockroaches coming out of the walls after January 6. But now he was giving the band an award. There were a lot of memes on the internet. And claims of being hypocritical. Didn't say anything, but the quiet spoke volumes. Simmons also went back on the road with his solo act in 2025. He spoke anecdotes from his 50-year career at the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally on August 3 without the typical Kiss armor. But not everyone was happy. Some tickets cost more than $500, and some didn't like the VIP package. Several concerts were canceled because sales were low by March 23. Fans thought he had gone too far by putting money ahead of the fans who produced him. Still, they said that things were easier now that the big Kiss setup was gone. Gene cried during an interview on CBS Mornings when Ozzy Osbourne died on July 23, 2025. He talked about how Kiss opened for Black Sabbath in 1975 and how Ozzy was a real person without an ego. He even said that Kiss rejected down a tour with Sabbath in the 1970s because Simmons wanted to keep his band's image pristine. Fans were shocked by that detail. Gene Simmons always maintained a solid hold on control, despite his shocking image and crazy behavior.